The job posting had been up for 3 weeks, a record that should have warned Maya about what she was walking into, but desperation has a way of making even the worst opportunities look like lifelines. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're ready to dive into another amazing story, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I've got another story just as thrilling as this one, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now, let's get started. Maya Chun stared at her laptop screen in the cramped corner of the coffee shop, the same job listing glowing mockingly at her for the dozenth time that morning. Housekeeper/personal assistant needed, immediate start, competitive salary, discretion required. The address belonged to Beacon Hill's most exclusive neighborhood, and the salary figure had enough zeros to make her heart race with dangerous hope. Another rejection email? Asked Beth, the barista who'd taken pity on Maya's daily presence and started bringing her free refills. No, Maya whispered, scrolling through her empty inbox. Nothing at all. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the gallery had let her go. Budget cuts, they'd claimed, though they'd hired someone new within days. 3 weeks since her landlord had posted the eviction notice. 3 weeks since she'd had to tell Elena that the experimental treatment would have to wait. Her phone buzzed. Elena. Maya's chest tightened as she answered. Maya. Her sister's voice was thin, tired. The doctor called. They have an opening in the trial program, but... How much? 15,000. Down payment by Friday or they give the spot to someone else. Maya closed her eyes. Friday. 4 days away. The eviction was Monday. Maya? Are you there? I'm here, Elena. I'll figure it out. You don't have to save me, you know. We've talked about this. We'll talk when you're better. Maya's voice carried a finality that ended the conversation, but not the weight pressing on her chest. She stared at the job posting again. Competitive salary. The reviews were non-existent. No ratings, no comments, just an eerily clean profile for Whitmore Estate Management. Even the name sounded cold. Her finger hovered over the apply button. What do you think? Is it worth taking a job that everyone else seems to be avoiding? Have you ever been desperate enough to ignore all the warning signs? 20 miles across the city, Alexander Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his home office, watching his latest housekeeper flee down his circular driveway with her belongings hastily stuffed into garbage bags. Mrs. Patterson, or was it Peterson, had lasted exactly 11 days. A new record, though not one that brought him any satisfaction. That's the 5th one this quarter, his assistant Graham observed from the doorway, his tone carefully neutral. Your point. Alexander didn't turn from the window. People are talking. The agency is reluctant to send more candidates. Now Alexander turned, his steel-gray eyes fixing on Graham with the kind of attention that made board members squirm. Are you suggesting I lower my standards? I'm suggesting that perhaps, a different approach. I pay them exceptionally well to do their job properly. If they can't handle clear expectations and direct feedback, they're not suited for the position. Graham nodded, though they both knew Alexander's version of direct feedback had reduced the last woman to tears before noon on her first day. Shall I contact another agency? Do whatever you think best. Just screen them properly this time. Alexander returned to his desk as Graham retreated, but the spreadsheet on his monitor might as well have been written in Sanskrit. He couldn't concentrate with the house empty again. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight. He'd grown up in this house, all 12,000 square feet of it. His father had filled it with laughter and dinner parties and business associates who became family friends. His mother had made it warm despite its size, somehow managing to make even the grand foyer feel welcoming. Now it felt like a mausoleum. And Alexander was both its guardian and its primary exhibit. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother James. Heard you lost another one. You know, if you actually tried being human occasionally. Alexander deleted the message without responding. James didn't understand. None of them did. The staff weren't friends, they were employees. The moment he let them get too comfortable, too familiar, they started expecting things. Consideration. Kindness. Emotional investment he couldn't afford to give. It was better this way. Cleaner. Professional. The silence stretched around him like an accusation. Maya's finger finally pressed apply, before she could change her mind. The response was immediate, an automated message requesting she come for an interview that same afternoon. The desperation of it should have been her second warning, after the 3-week posting. Instead, it felt like providence. She spent her last $20 on dry cleaning her interview suit and taking the subway to Beacon Hill. The Whitmore estate loomed behind wrought iron gates like something from a different century, all stone and sharp angles and windows that seemed to watch her approach. The man who opened the door wasn't what she'd expected. Tall, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to take her measure in an instant. "Ms. Chen? I'm Graham Porter, Mr. Whitmore's assistant. Please come in." The interior was beautiful and cold, marble floors that echoed her footsteps, artwork that belonged in museums, and a silence so complete it felt sacred. Maya found herself walking more quietly without being asked. "Mr. Whitmore will see you in his office. A word of advice." Graham's voice dropped. "He values directness and competence above all else. Don't take anything personally." The warning should have prepared her, but when Graham knocked on the office door and ushered her inside, Maya felt her breath catch. Alexander Whitmore sat behind a desk that probably cost more than her yearly rent, and when he looked up, his eyes hit her like a physical impact. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with dark hair and a face that belonged on magazine covers. But there was something in his expression, something sharp and assessing, that made her want to take a step back. "Sit," he said without preamble, not bothering with pleasantries. Maya sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "You have no references from household staff positions." It wasn't a question, but Maya answered anyway. "No, sir. I worked in gallery management for 3 years. Before that, administrative assistants and—" "Why do you want this position?" The blunt interruption caught her off guard. She could lie, talk about seeking new challenges or career growth. Instead, something in his directness called for honesty. "I need the job," she said simply. "I need it badly enough that I'm willing to work harder than whoever you had before me." His eyebrows rose slightly, surprise maybe. "The position requires discretion. You'll be in my personal space, handling private matters. That makes some people presumptuous." "I'm not most people." "Prove it." "The last 5 housekeepers lasted an average of 2 weeks. What makes you think you'll be different?" Maya met his gaze steadily. "Because I understand the difference between professional courtesy and familiarity. Because I don't quit when things get difficult. And because I suspect you're not nearly as impossible to work for as you want everyone to believe." The silence that followed was so complete Maya could hear her own heartbeat. Alexander Whitmore studied her with the intensity of someone solving a complex equation, and she had the unsettling feeling he was seeing straight through every defense she'd carefully constructed. Finally, he spoke. "The position pays $80,000 annually, with performance bonuses. You'll work 6 days a week, live-in accommodations provided. Graham will give you the details." "You're offering me the job?" "I'm offering you a trial period. 1 month. If you last that long, we'll discuss making it permanent." Maya felt dizzy with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. You won't regret." "I don't make decisions I regret, Ms. Chun." He was already looking back at his computer screen, dismissing her. "Graham will show you to your quarters. You start Monday." She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. "Ms. Chen? The women who worked here before you, they found me difficult, demanding, unreasonable. They weren't wrong." Maya turned back to find him watching her again with that unsettling intensity. "I expect excellence, not excuses. I value efficiency, not emotional displays. If you're looking for warmth or friendship, you'll be disappointed. What you will find is fair compensation for professional service. Nothing more." The warning was clear, but something in his voice, a careful control that suggested effort rather than nature, made Maya nod calmly. "Understood, Mr. Whitmore. I'll see you Monday." She left his office with her heart pounding and a job that might save everything that mattered to her. But as Graham showed her through the beautiful, empty house, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alexander Whitmore's warnings weren't meant to discourage her. They were meant to protect himself. Monday morning arrived with a kind of October chill that made Maya grateful for the warm coat she'd retrieved from her now empty apartment. She stood at the servants' entrance of the Whitmore estate at exactly 7 a.m., her single suitcase in hand and her stomach twisted in knots that had nothing to do with the early hour. Graham met her with coffee, and what she was already learning was his signature expression of professional sympathy. "He's been up since 5, Graham murmured, leading her through a maze of service corridors she hadn't seen during her interview. "Bad night, I think. The anniversary is coming up." Anniversary. Graham's steps slowed, and for a moment, Maya thought he might explain. Instead, he simply said, "Just be extra careful today. Please." Her quarters were on the 3rd floor, a suite that was larger and more elegantly furnished than any apartment she'd ever lived in. The windows overlooked the estate's gardens, where early morning mist clung to perfectly manicured hedges like something from a fairy tale. "Your duties begin in the main house at 8, Graham explained, handing her a leather folder. "Everything's detailed there. Kitchen staff arrives at 6 on weekdays. Mrs. Rodriguez will orient you. Mr. Whitmore takes his coffee in his study at 8:15 sharp. He's very particular about timing." Maya nodded, though her hands were already shaking as she opened the folder. The list was extensive: meal preparation, household management, correspondence, calendar coordination, personal shopping. Essentially, she was being hired to manage every aspect of Alexander Whitmore's domestic life. The last page made her breath catch. A salary breakdown that included the $80,000 base, plus performance bonuses that could push it well over 6 figures. It was more money than she'd ever imagined earning. "Questions?" Graham asked. Why did the others really leave? Graham's professional mask slipped for just a moment. They took things personally. Mr. Whitmore isn't cruel, exactly. But he's exacting. And when people disappoint him, he doesn't hide it well. At 8:10, Maya knocked on the study door with a silver coffee service that probably cost more than her car. No response came, but Graham had warned her that Alexander often didn't acknowledge knocks when he was working. She entered quietly, expecting to find him at his desk. Instead, he stood at the same windows where she'd first seen him, still as a statue, wearing a suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body. He didn't turn when she approached. "Coffee service, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, setting the tray on the small table near the windows. Still no response. Maya hesitated, unsure whether to leave or stay. In the morning light, she could see tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and careful control. She was turning to go when his voice stopped her. "Do you have siblings, Ms. Chen?" The question was so unexpected she almost stumbled. Yes. A sister." "Older or younger?" "Younger. Elena." The name slipped out before she could stop it. Finally, he turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her chest tighten. Raw grief, quickly masked but unmistakable. "I had a sister," he said quietly. "Caroline. She would have been 30 today." Would have been. The past tense hit like a physical blow, and suddenly Maya understood Graham's warnings, the careful handling, the anniversary he'd mentioned. "I'm sorry," she whispered, meaning it. "She died 8 years ago. Car accident." His voice was clinical now, professional. "I was supposed to drive her to the airport that morning. Business call ran long. She took a cab instead." Maya felt her throat close. She understood survivors' guilt intimately, had carried her own version since Elena's diagnosis. But she also recognized the dangerous territory they were entering. He was sharing something deeply personal, and his own rules about professional distance were crumbling in real time. "It wasn't your fault," she said, because someone needed to say it. Alexander's mask snapped back into place, so quickly she almost flinched. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Ms. Chun." "No, sir. You didn't. Your job is to manage my household, not psychoanalyze me." "Yes, sir." But instead of dismissing her, he continued staring out the window, and Maya found herself unable to leave. Something about his stillness, his careful control, reminded her of Elena in her hospital bed, trying so hard to be brave that it broke Maya's heart. "She was getting married," Alexander said suddenly, so quietly Maya almost missed it. "Caroline. That weekend. I was flying her out to meet her fiancé's family. She was so excited." The coffee was growing cold on the tray, but neither of them moved to touch it. Maya stayed frozen by the door, afraid that any motion might shatter whatever spell had loosened his tongue. She called me from the cab. Said she understood why the business was important to me, but that she hoped someday I'd find something that mattered more. His laugh was bitter. She was always trying to fix me. Save me from myself. Did she succeed? The question escaped before Maya could stop it, and Alexander's head turned sharply toward her. For a moment, she was certain he'd explode, fire her on the spot for the presumption. Instead, he studied her with that same unsettling intensity from her interview. What do you think, Ms. Chun? Maya looked around the beautiful, empty office. At the man who surrounded himself with luxury but lived in isolation. At the walls lined with awards and achievements but no family photos. I think she's still trying, Maya said softly. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander's jaw clenched, and Maya knew she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She waited for the explosion, the dismissal, the cold fury she'd been warned about. Instead, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. As if he'd been expecting her to say something else entirely, and her honesty had caught him off guard. Pour the coffee, he said finally, his voice rough. And in the future, Ms. Chun, remember that I'm paying you for your service, not your insights into my character. Yes, sir. But as Maya poured the coffee with steady hands, she noticed he didn't move away when she approached. Didn't retreat behind his desk or dismiss her immediately. Instead, he accepted the cup she offered, and for just a moment, their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, barely a second, but something electric passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or possibility. Alexander's eyes widened slightly, and Maya felt her breath catch. Then he stepped back, professional distance slamming into place like a steel door. That will be all, Ms. Chun. I'll review your performance at the end of the week. Maya nodded and gathered the service tray, but as she reached the door, she turned back. Alexander was watching her leave, and in his expression, she caught a glimpse of something that made her pulse quicken. Curiosity. As if she'd presented him with a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her hand on the door handle. Yes. Caroline was right. About finding something that matters more. She left before he could respond, closing the door behind her with her heart racing. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and tried to process what had just happened. She'd been hired to be invisible, professional, efficient. Instead, she'd seen straight through his carefully constructed walls to the grief and loneliness underneath. And worse, or better, he'd let her see it. Have you ever had a moment where you saw past someone's walls and realized they weren't the person everyone thought they were? What did you do with that knowledge? Graham found her there 5 minutes later, still pressed against the wall with wide eyes. Everything all right? He asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. I think, Maya said slowly, I just made the biggest mistake of my life. Graham's smile was sad and knowing. Or the bravest choice. With Mr. Whitmore, it's often hard to tell the difference. As Maya made her way to the kitchen to begin the rest of her duties, she couldn't shake the memory of that moment. The grief in Alexander's eyes, the electricity when their fingers touched, the way he'd looked at her like she was a riddle he desperately wanted to solve. She'd come here for a job. A way to save Elena and keep herself afloat. But something told her she'd stumbled into something much more dangerous than employment. She'd stumbled into the possibility of mattering to someone who'd forgotten how to let anyone matter at all. Behind the study door, Alexander stood at his windows with untouched coffee growing cold in his hands, replaying every word of their conversation. No one had mentioned Caroline's name in his presence for years. No one dared. But Maya Chun had said it like a prayer. Like Caroline was still real, still present, still worth remembering out loud. And when she'd said Caroline was still trying to fix him, Alexander closed his eyes and felt something crack in the armor he'd spent 8 years perfecting. Something dangerous and terrifying and achingly familiar. Hope. The rest of Monday passed in careful choreography. Maya threw herself into her duties with a kind of methodical precision that left no room for thinking about steel-gray eyes or the way Alexander's voice had cracked when he said Caroline's name. She reorganized his calendar, coordinated with the kitchen staff, managed his correspondence, and maintained a professional distance that felt like walking on glass. Alexander, for his part, became a ghost in his own house. She caught glimpses of him, a figure disappearing around corners, the sound of his office door closing, the untouched lunch tray she collected each afternoon. When their paths did cross, he was polite, distant, and so carefully controlled it made her chest ache. By Wednesday, the silence was suffocating. "He's avoiding you," Mrs. Rodriguez observed as Maya prepared the morning coffee service. The head cook was a tiny woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "In 30 years working for this family, I've never seen him hide from anyone." "I'm not sure that's what he's doing," Maya lied, arranging the service with unnecessary precision. "Mija, I've seen him fire people for breathing too loudly. You made him remember he has a heart, and now he doesn't know what to do with you." Maya's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "What happened to Caroline?" Mrs. Rodriguez's expression softened. "Beautiful girl. Full of light, you know? Always trying to get Alexander to smile, to take breaks, to remember there was a world outside his work." She shook her head sadly. "After she died, he built those walls so high I sometimes wonder if he can see over them anymore. The accident wasn't his fault. But try telling him that." Mrs. Rodriguez touched Maya's arm gently. "He blames himself for everything that goes wrong. Thinks if he cares about nothing, nothing can hurt him again." Maya nodded, though the knowledge felt like carrying lead in her chest. She understood the logic, had used similar reasoning herself when Elena was first diagnosed. Caring hurt. Loving meant risking loss. It was easier to stay numb. But numbness wasn't living. It was just a slower way of dying. She knocked on the study door at 8:15 exactly, as she had every morning that week. As expected, no response came. She entered to find Alexander at his desk this time, surrounded by papers and clearly determined to ignore her presence entirely. "Coffee service, Mr. Whitmore," she said, setting the tray in its usual spot. Nothing. Not even a nod of acknowledgement. Maya should have left. Should have maintained the professional distance he was so clearly desperate to establish. Instead, she found herself saying, "Mrs. Rodriguez made fresh pastries this morning. Lemon scones. They're still warm." Alexander's pen paused for the briefest moment before resuming its path across the document he was reviewing. "I don't eat breakfast. You don't eat lunch either. Or dinner, from what I can tell." Now he looked up, and the ice in his eyes would have frozen a lesser person solid. "Ms. Chun, are you under the impression that your employment includes monitoring my eating habits?" "I'm under the impression that dead employers don't pay very well." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Maya couldn't believe she'd said them, couldn't believe she was pushing when everything about his posture screamed retreat. But something about his careful avoidance, his determined isolation, sparked a rebellion in her chest. "You have something to say to me, Ms. Chun?" His voice was deadly quiet, and Maya recognized the tone Graham had warned her about. This was the voice that had reduced 5 housekeepers to tears and sent them fleeing for safer employment. She should apologize. Back down. Return to the safe harbor of professional invisibility. Instead, she stepped closer to his desk. "Yes, actually. I do." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with the expression of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. "Then by all means, enlighten me. You're punishing me for Monday morning. For seeing you be human for 5 minutes. I'm maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. You're hiding." The words were out before Maya could stop them, and Alexander's face went completely blank, the kind of empty that preceded explosions. "Hiding," he repeated, his voice soft and dangerous. "Yes. From me, from yourself, from anything that might remind you that Caroline existed and mattered and loved you enough to worry about your happiness." Alexander stood slowly, his full height and presence suddenly filling the space between them. When he spoke, his voice could have cut glass. "You've been here 3 days, Ms. Chun. 3 days. And you think that gives you the right to psychoanalyze my relationship with my dead sister?" Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't step back. "I think it gives me the right to do my job without you disappearing every time I enter a room. Your job is to manage my household. Not manage me. Then stop making it impossible to do my job by treating me like I carry the plague." They were standing too close now, close enough that Maya could see the silver flecks in his eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Close enough to count the careful breaths he was taking to maintain his control. "You want to know why I'm avoiding you?" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than shouting would have. Because you walked into my study on Monday morning and within 10 minutes had me talking about things I don't discuss with anyone. Ever. And that terrifies you. That annoys me. There's a difference. But Maya caught the lie in his voice, saw the way his hands clenched at his sides. She'd struck something true, and they both knew it. Caroline wouldn't want this, she said softly. She wouldn't want you living like a ghost in your own house. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Alexander's control shattered like glass hitting concrete, and suddenly Maya found herself backed against the bookshelf with 6 feet of furious billionaire looming over her. Don't. His voice was raw, broken. Don't you dare stand in my house and tell me what my sister would want. You didn't know her. You don't know anything about her or about me or about what I've lost. Maya should have been terrified. Should have apologized and fled. Instead, she looked up into his tortured eyes and saw the truth he was desperately trying to hide. You're right, she whispered. I didn't know her. But I know you're in pain, and I know hiding from everyone who might care about you isn't going to bring her back. Get out. Alexander. Get out of my study. Get out of my house. You're fired. The words hit like physical blows, but Maya held her ground. No. No. His eyebrows shot up in disbelief. No. You don't get to fire me because I saw you be human. You don't get to push me away because you're scared of feeling something again. Ms. Chun. My sister is dying. The words tore from her throat before she could stop them, desperate and raw. Elena has leukemia, and she's running out of time, and I took this job because the experimental treatment that might save her costs more money than I've ever seen in my life. Alexander went completely still. So no, Maya continued, her voice shaking but determined, you don't get to fire me because you're uncomfortable with genuine human connection. You don't get to hide behind your money and your walls and your guilt, because some of us don't have the luxury of giving up. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Alexander stared down at her with an expression she couldn't read, surprise, anger, something that might have been respect. Finally, he stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair and destroying its perfect styling. You should have told me. About your sister. Why? So you could pity me the way you hate people pitying you. That earned her something that might have been a smile, though it disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. Ms. Chun, Maya, I'm not. He struggled with words in a way that suggested he rarely found himself at a loss. I don't do this well. Connection. Caring about people. It doesn't end well for anyone involved. Because of Caroline? Because of who I am. What I am. His voice was hollow, defeated. I'm not good at letting people close. And when I do, when I care about them, they die in car accidents because you were on a business call? The bluntness of it made him flinch, but Maya pressed on. Or they get diagnosed with cancer despite you doing everything right. Or they leave you because life is unpredictable and painful and sometimes there's no one to blame. She stepped closer, ignoring every instinct that told her to retreat. You're not responsible for every bad thing that happens to people you love, Alexander. You're just responsible for loving them while you can. He stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man he might have been before grief carved him hollow. Then his phone rang, shrill in the charged silence between them, and the moment shattered. Alexander reached for it automatically, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Whitmore. Maya watched his face change as he listened, saw him retreat back behind his walls like she was watching a door close. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, ending the call. When he looked at her again, his eyes were distant, controlled. Emergency board meeting. I'll be gone most of the day. Alexander. We'll continue this conversation later, Ms. Chun. You're not fired. We'll figure something out. He gathered his papers with mechanical efficiency, not meeting her eyes. At the door, he paused. The treatment for your sister. How much do you need? Maya's throat closed. 15,000. By Friday. He nodded once, then left without another word. Maya stood alone in his study, surrounded by the scent of his cologne and the echo of their confrontation, wondering what the hell had just happened. She'd pushed him, challenged him, made him remember his humanity, and instead of the explosion she'd expected, she'd gotten something far more dangerous. She'd gotten honesty. Raw, painful truth about his fears and his guilt and his certainty that caring about people led only to loss. When someone builds walls to protect themselves, is it cruel or kind to try to tear them down? What do you do when helping someone means forcing them to feel pain they've spent years avoiding? But as Maya made her way back to her duties, she couldn't shake the memory of those final moments. The way Alexander had looked at her like she was a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve, the careful question about Elena's treatment, the promise that they would figure something out. He was fighting the connection between them with everything he had. But he was also fighting himself, and Maya was beginning to suspect she might be winning both battles. The question was, what would victory cost them both? Alexander didn't return that evening. Or the next morning. Maya found herself listening for the sound of his car in the circular drive, checking the windows more often than necessary, and hating herself for the disappointment that settled in her chest when Thursday came and went without a word. "He's staying at his city apartment," Graham explained when Maya finally asked. "He does this sometimes. When he needs space to think." Space from her, Maya understood. Space from whatever was building between them. The dangerous current that had sparked to life in his study and refused to die despite all their efforts to smother it. Friday morning brought Elena's deadline and a wire transfer notification to Maya's phone that made her knees buckle. $15,000. Deposited at exactly 9 a.m. from Whitmore Industries with a memo that read simply, "Advance on salary." Maya stared at the notification until her eyes blurred, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and something else, something that felt dangerously like falling. She called Elena immediately. "The treatment spot is yours," she told her sister, barely able to form the words through her tears. "I got the money. You can start Monday." Elena's sob of relief echoed through the phone, and for a moment, Maya forgot about everything else, about complicated billionaires and dangerous connections and the way her heart jumped every time she heard footsteps in a hallway. Elena was going to be okay. Everything else could wait. But as Friday afternoon bled into evening and the first October snow began to fall, Maya found herself restless in the empty house. Mrs. Rodriguez had left early, Graham had gone to his own apartment in the city, and Maya was alone with her thoughts and the echoing silence of 12,000 square feet of beautiful emptiness. She was making herself tea in the kitchen when the lights flickered, then went out entirely. Maya stood in the sudden darkness, heart racing as she tried to orient herself in the unfamiliar space. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving the snow sideways against the windows with a violence that spoke of a serious storm. Her phone's flashlight revealed a note pinned to the refrigerator that she'd somehow missed earlier. Maya generator in basement. Fuse box in pantry. Stay warm. Gee. Of course there was a generator. Rich people didn't suffer power outages like normal people. But as Maya made her way carefully toward the basement stairs, phone light dancing ahead of her, she heard the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming outside. Alexander was home. Maya reached the basement just as she heard the front door open, followed by his voice, sharp, frustrated, talking to someone on the phone. "I don't care what the weather service says, Richards. The presentation is Monday morning, and I need those contracts reviewed by," his voice cut off abruptly, and Maya heard his footsteps stop in what she assumed was the foyer. "The power's out." Maya found the generator, a beast of a machine that looked more complex than her first car. She was studying the control panel when she heard Alexander's voice much closer than expected. "Ms. Chun." She turned to find him at the bottom of the basement stairs, his phone's flashlight creating stark shadows on his face. His hair was dusted with snow, his expensive coat dark with moisture, and something about seeing him slightly disheveled made her pulse quicken. "Mr. Whitmore. I was just trying to." "The generator." "Yes. Here, let me." He moved past her, close enough that she caught the scent of his cologne mixed with cold air and something uniquely him. His fingers found the controls with practiced ease, and within moments, the machine hummed to life. "There should be emergency power in the main areas now," he said, still not quite meeting her eyes. "Partial heating, basic lighting." "Thank you." They stood in the basement's dim emergency lighting, the generator's steady hum filling the silence between them. Alexander looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes and tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and too much caffeine. "You got the transfer," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Thank you. I don't know how to." "It's an advance." You'll work it off. His tone was deliberately casual, but Maya caught the lie. No advance came without contracts, without formal agreements. He'd simply given her the money, and they both knew it. Alexander. We should get upstairs. Check the rest of the house. He was already moving toward the stairs, but Maya's voice stopped him. Why did you come back tonight? He paused, one foot on the bottom step. It's my house. You have an apartment in the city. You could have stayed there until the storm passed. Alexander turned slowly, and in the emergency lighting, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. Are you questioning my decision-making process, Ms. Chen? I'm wondering if maybe you were worried about me being here alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, something warring in his expression, denial, admission, something that might have been panic. The roads are getting dangerous, he said finally. I thought it was better to. The lights went out again. This time the darkness was complete. The generator had died as suddenly as it had started, leaving them in a basement with only the glow of their phones for company. Damn, Alexander muttered, and Maya heard him moving back toward the machine. It's been acting up. I've been meaning to have it serviced. Can you fix it? Maybe. But it could take hours, and we'll need to. A crash from upstairs cut him off, the sound of something heavy falling, followed by the tinkling of glass. Tree branch, Alexander said grimly. Probably came through one of the sunroom windows. We need to get up there before. Another crash, closer this time, and suddenly Maya felt Alexander's hand on her arm, warm and solid in the darkness. Carefully, he said, his voice close to her ear. The main stairs should be safe, but we need to avoid the sunroom entirely. They made their way upstairs like explorers in a cave, phone lights creating small pools of visibility in the overwhelming dark. The temperature was already dropping. Maya could see her breath in the thin beams, and the sound of wind through broken glass created an eerie soundtrack to their careful progress. Jesus, Alexander breathed as they reached the main floor and saw the extent of the damage. The sunroom was destroyed. What had once been a beautiful glass-walled space overlooking the gardens was now a chaos of broken windows, twisted metal, and a massive oak branch that had punched through the roof like a giant's fist. Snow was already accumulating on the Persian rugs. We need to seal this off, Alexander said, shrugging out of his wet coat. Keep the heat in the rest of the house. Do you know if there are tarps in the maintenance shed? Maya finished. But that's across the courtyard, and with this wind. I'll go. You find blankets, candles, whatever we have for emergency supplies. And check the fireplace in the living room, make sure the flue is clear. Alexander, you can't go out in this storm. It's dangerous. He was already pulling his coat back on. It's more dangerous to let the house freeze. I'll be quick. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Maya stepped closer, close enough to see the stubborn set of his jaw in the phone light. You're not going alone. If something happens to you out there, nothing's going to happen to me. You don't know that. Her voice cracked slightly on the words, revealing more than she'd intended. Please. Let me help. Alexander stared at her for a moment, and Maya saw the exact moment he realized what she wasn't saying, that the thought of him getting hurt, of losing him before they'd even figured out what this was between them, terrified her more than she wanted to admit. Maya. Two people are safer than one. You know that. He closed his eyes, clearly fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, resignation and something that might have been relief warred in his expression. Stay close to me, he said finally. No matter what happens out there, you don't let go of my hand. Understood. Maya nodded, though her heart was hammering at the implications. They were going to hold hands. Out of necessity, survival, practical concerns, but still. Alexander found heavy coats and gloves for both of them, then led her to the side door that opened onto the courtyard. The wind hit them like a physical wall the moment they stepped outside, driving snow so hard it felt like needles against exposed skin. But Alexander's hand closed around hers immediately, strong and warm even through their gloves, and suddenly Maya felt like she could face anything. The maintenance shed might as well have been on another planet. They fought their way across the courtyard step by step, Alexander breaking the wind for her, his grip on her hand never loosening even when they stumbled or slipped on the accumulating ice. Inside the shed, They worked quickly, gathering tarps, rope, emergency supplies, battery-powered lanterns. But when they tried to leave, the wind had intensified even more. "We should wait," Maya shouted over the howling. "Until it dies down a little." Alexander nodded, pulling her deeper into the shed and closing the door against the storm. In the sudden relative quiet, their breathing sounded loud and urgent. "Are you okay?" he asked, his hands moving to her shoulders, checking her for damage with a thoroughness that made her pulse spike. "I'm fine. Are you?" "Fine." But his hands didn't drop from her shoulders, and in the close confines of the shed, Maya became acutely aware of everything: his height, his warmth, the way his eyes searched her face in the dim light. "Alexander," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was asking. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I know." They stood like that for a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Maya could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the conflict playing across his features as he fought between what he wanted and what he thought he should do. Then the shed door rattled violently in its frame, reminding them both of the storm waiting outside, and the moment shattered. "We should go," Alexander said, stepping back. "Before it gets worse." The return trip to the house was even more brutal, but they made it together, stumbling through the door like survivors of a shipwreck. Once inside, they worked in surprisingly efficient partnership, sealing off the damaged sunroom, starting a fire in the living room, setting up battery-powered lighting throughout the main floor. By the time they finished, they were both exhausted, soaked, and shivering despite the fire's warmth. Have you ever been stuck somewhere with someone you were trying to avoid? How do forced circumstances change the dynamic between people who are fighting their feelings? "We should probably stay down here tonight," Alexander said, surveying their work. "The upstairs will be too cold without the main heating system." Maya nodded, though the implications made her stomach flutter. 1 room. 1 fire. 1 long night with nowhere to retreat. "I'll get blankets," she said, grateful for an excuse to escape the sudden intimacy of the firelit room. But as she headed toward the linen closet, Alexander's voice stopped her. "Maya." She turned back to find him silhouetted against the fire, his expression unreadable. "Thank you. For helping tonight. For not letting me go out there alone." "Thank you for coming back," she said softly. "For not leaving me here to face this by myself." Something passed between them in the flickering light, understanding, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement that whatever they were fighting, whatever walls they were trying to maintain, the storm had stripped away their ability to hide from each other. They were trapped together, with nowhere to run and nothing left to do but face whatever this was between them. And despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the 1,000 reasons this was a terrible idea, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years settling into her chest. Safety. The bone-deep knowledge that whatever happened tonight, she wasn't facing it alone. Alexander felt it too. She could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed for the first time since she'd known him, in the almost smile that ghosted across his face as he watched her gather blankets. The storm raged outside, trapping them in this moment, this space, this dangerous possibility. And for the first time since Caroline's death, Alexander Whitmore didn't want to be anywhere else. The fire crackled between them like a living thing, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the living room that had been transformed into their temporary shelter. Maya had arranged blankets and pillows on the 2 large sofas that faced each other across the coffee table, creating a cozy refuge against the storm that continued to rage outside. Alexander sat on one sofa, still in his dress shirt but with the sleeves rolled up and the top buttons undone, the most casual Maya had ever seen him. She occupied the opposite sofa, wrapped in a cashmere throw that probably cost more than her monthly rent, nursing a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. They'd been sitting in comfortable silence for nearly an hour, both pretending to read by lamplight, both acutely aware of every breath, every shift, every glance the other made. "The fire needs more wood," Alexander said finally, though the flames were still strong. "I'll get it," Maya offered, already starting to rise. "No, I've got it." They both stood at the same time, both reached for the poker at the same moment, and suddenly they were inches apart with their hands brushing and the full weight of the day's intimacy crashing down between them. "Sorry, Maya started. "I didn't mean to," Alexander began at the same moment. They both stopped, both stepped back, both laughed nervously at the absurdity of their careful choreography around each other. "We're being ridiculous," Maya said finally. "Completely ridiculous," Alexander agreed, but something in his voice suggested he was talking about more than just their awkward dance around the fireplace. He added wood to the fire with practiced efficiency, and Maya found herself watching the way the flames highlighted the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his expression as he worked. When he caught her staring, she felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Tell me about Elena," he said as he settled back onto his sofa, his voice carefully casual. "How long has she been sick?" The question caught Maya off guard. In the 3 hours they'd spent fighting the storm and settling in for the night, they'd talked about logistics, immediate concerns, safe topics that didn't venture into dangerous emotional territory. 2 years, Maya said softly. She was diagnosed right after she graduated college. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. That's treatable, isn't it? Usually. She went into remission once, for about 6 months. We thought. Maya's voice caught. We thought she'd beaten it. Then it came back, aggressive. The standard treatments aren't working anymore. Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. This experimental program, what are the odds? 60% success rate. Which sounds good until you're talking about your sister's life, and then 60% feels like rolling dice with the only person who matters. But you're doing it anyway. What choice do I have? Maya's voice cracked slightly. She's 24 years old. She should be falling in love and traveling and making terrible decisions and figuring out who she wants to be. Instead, she spends her days in hospital rooms, and I spend mine trying to figure out how to keep her alive. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Alexander stared into the fire, his jaw working as if he was fighting some internal battle. You blame yourself, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Every day. I should have caught it sooner. Should have made her go to the doctor when she first started feeling tired. Should have been a better sister, more attentive, more. Maya. Alexander's voice cut through her spiral with gentle firmness. It's not your fault. The words hit her like a physical blow, carrying all the weight of months of guilt and self-recrimination. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I know what real guilt looks like. I know what it means to be responsible for someone's death. And this isn't that. Maya looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Alexander. Caroline called me that morning, he said, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it over the fire's crackling. Before she got in the cab. She was excited about the wedding, about meeting David's family. She wanted to know what I thought she should wear to the rehearsal dinner. Maya set down her mug and gave him her full attention, sensing this was a story he'd never told before. I was in the middle of a conference call. A merger that had been months in the making, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I told her I'd call her back. Alexander's laugh was bitter, self-loathing. I actually told my sister, my baby sister who was nervous about meeting her future in-laws, that I'd call her back because money was more important than her anxiety. But you didn't know. I never called her back, Alexander continued as if she hadn't spoken. The call ran long, then there was another crisis, then another meeting. By the time I remembered, she was dead. The weight of his confession settled between them like a physical presence. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes, not just for Caroline but for the man sitting across from her who'd been carrying this burden alone for 8 years. The last thing she said to me was, I love you, Alex. I hope someday you find something that matters more than work. And I was so focused on proving myself, on building this empire, that I let her die thinking work mattered more to me than she did. Alexander, no. She was right, though. Work was all I cared about. I told myself I was doing it for the family, for legacy, but really I was just terrified of being vulnerable. Of letting people close enough to hurt me. He looked directly at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. So I lost her anyway. Maya couldn't stand the distance between them anymore. She moved to his sofa, settling beside him close enough to take his hands in hers. His fingers were cold despite the fire's warmth, and she could feel the fine tremor running through them. She knew you loved her, Maya said fiercely. Alexander, she knew. Sisters always know. Do they? His voice was raw, broken. Elena knows you love her? The parallel hit Maya like a lightning strike. That's different. I'm doing everything I can to save her. By working yourself to death? By taking jobs that terrify you? By sacrificing your own life piece by piece. Maya opened her mouth to argue, then stopped as the truth of his words sank in. I can't lose her. But you're losing yourself instead. Just like I did. They sat in the firelight, holding hands and facing the mirror each had become for the other, two people so afraid of losing the ones they loved that they'd forgotten how to live. I found something, Alexander said suddenly. After Caroline died. I was going through her things, and I found a journal she'd kept. The last entry was about me. Maya waited, sensing he needed to tell this story at his own pace. She wrote that she was worried about me. That success was making me hard, distant. She said she hoped I'd find someone who would remind me how to feel things deeply again. Alexander's voice cracked. She said she hoped I'd find someone who would love me enough to call me on my shit. Tree branch, Alexander said grimly. Probably came through one of the sunroom windows. We need to get up there before. Another crash, closer this time, and suddenly Maya felt Alexander's hand on her arm, warm and solid in the darkness. Carefully, he said, his voice close to her ear. The main stairs should be safe, but we need to avoid the sunroom entirely. They made their way upstairs like explorers in a cave, phone lights creating small pools of visibility in the overwhelming dark. The temperature was already dropping. Maya could see her breath in the thin beams, and the sound of wind through broken glass created an eerie soundtrack to their careful progress. Jesus, Alexander breathed as they reached the main floor and saw the extent of the damage. The sunroom was destroyed. What had once been a beautiful glass-walled space overlooking the gardens was now a chaos of broken windows, twisted metal, and a massive oak branch that had punched through the roof like a giant's fist. Snow was already accumulating on the Persian rugs. We need to seal this off, Alexander said, shrugging out of his wet coat. Keep the heat in the rest of the house. Do you know if there are tarps in the maintenance shed? Maya finished. But that's across the courtyard, and with this wind. I'll go. You find blankets, candles, whatever we have for emergency supplies. And check the fireplace in the living room, make sure the flue is clear. Alexander, you can't go out in this storm. It's dangerous. He was already pulling his coat back on. It's more dangerous to let the house freeze. I'll be quick. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Maya stepped closer, close enough to see the stubborn set of his jaw in the phone light. You're not going alone. If something happens to you out there, nothing's going to happen to me. You don't know that. Her voice cracked slightly on the words, revealing more than she'd intended. Please. Let me help. Alexander stared at her for a moment, and Maya saw the exact moment he realized what she wasn't saying, that the thought of him getting hurt, of losing him before they'd even figured out what this was between them, terrified her more than she wanted to admit. Maya. Two people are safer than one. You know that. He closed his eyes, clearly fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, resignation and something that might have been relief warred in his expression. Stay close to me, he said finally. No matter what happens out there, you don't let go of my hand. Understood. Maya nodded, though her heart was hammering at the implications. They were going to hold hands. Out of necessity, survival, practical concerns, but still. Alexander found heavy coats and gloves for both of them, then led her to the side door that opened onto the courtyard. The wind hit them like a physical wall the moment they stepped outside, driving snow so hard it felt like needles against exposed skin. But Alexander's hand closed around hers immediately, strong and warm even through their gloves, and suddenly Maya felt like she could face anything. The maintenance shed might as well have been on another planet. They fought their way across the courtyard step by step, Alexander breaking the wind for her, his grip on her hand never loosening even when they stumbled or slipped on the accumulating ice. Inside the shed, they worked quickly, gathering tarps, rope, emergency supplies, battery-powered lanterns. But when they tried to leave, the wind had intensified even more. We should wait, Maya shouted over the howling. Until it dies down a little. Alexander nodded, pulling her deeper into the shed and closing the door against the storm. In the sudden relative quiet, their breathing sounded loud and urgent. Are you okay? He asked, his hands moving to her shoulders, checking her for damage with a thoroughness that made her pulse spike. I'm fine. Are you? Fine. But his hands didn't drop from her shoulders, and in the close confines of the shed, Maya became acutely aware of everything. His height, his warmth, the way his eyes searched her face in the dim light. "Alexander," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was asking. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I know." They stood like that for a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Maya could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the conflict playing across his features as he fought between what he wanted and what he thought he should do. Then the shed door rattled violently in its frame, reminding them both of the storm waiting outside, and the moment shattered. "We should go," Alexander said, stepping back. "Before it gets worse." The return trip to the house was even more brutal, but they made it together, stumbling through the door like survivors of a shipwreck. Once inside, they worked in surprisingly efficient partnership, sealing off the damaged sunroom, starting a fire in the living room, setting up battery-powered lighting throughout the main floor. By the time they finished, they were both exhausted, soaked, and shivering despite the fire's warmth. Have you ever been stuck somewhere with someone you were trying to avoid? How do forced circumstances change the dynamic between people who are fighting their feelings? "We should probably stay down here tonight," Alexander said, surveying their work. "The upstairs will be too cold without the main heating system." Maya nodded, though the implications made her stomach flutter. 1 room. 1 fire. 1 long night with nowhere to retreat. "I'll get blankets," she said, grateful for an excuse to escape the sudden intimacy of the firelit room. But as she headed toward the linen closet, Alexander's voice stopped her. "Maya." She turned back to find him silhouetted against the fire, his expression unreadable. "Thank you. For helping tonight. For not letting me go out there alone. Thank you for coming back," she said softly. "For not leaving me here to face this by myself." Something passed between them in the flickering light, understanding, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement that whatever they were fighting, whatever walls they were trying to maintain, the storm had stripped away their ability to hide from each other. They were trapped together, with nowhere to run and nothing left to do but face whatever this was between them. And despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the 1,000 reasons this was a terrible idea, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years settling into her chest. Safety. The bone-deep knowledge that whatever happened tonight, she wasn't facing it alone. Alexander felt it too. She could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed for the first time since she'd known him, in the almost smile that ghosted across his face as he watched her gather blankets. The storm raged outside, trapping them in this moment, this space, this dangerous possibility. And for the first time since Caroline's death, Alexander Whitmore didn't want to be anywhere else. The fire crackled between them like a living thing, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the living room that had been transformed into their temporary shelter. Maya had arranged blankets and pillows on the 2 large sofas that faced each other across the coffee table, creating a cozy refuge against the storm that continued to rage outside. Fresh tears spilled down Maya's cheeks. "She sounds like she was an amazing person." "She was. And she would have liked you." Alexander turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to brush away her tears. "She would have liked how you refused to let me hide. How you see straight through all my defenses and call me out on my cowardice. I don't think you're a coward." "I am, though. I've spent 8 years hiding in this house, pushing away anyone who might matter, convincing myself it was noble self-sacrifice when really it was just fear." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and Maya felt her breath catch. "Then you walked into my study and within 5 minutes had me talking about Caroline like she was still alive. Like she still mattered. She does still matter." "I know. I think I'd forgotten that. That loving someone who's gone doesn't have to hurt constantly. That carrying someone's memory can be a joy instead of a punishment." Maya leaned into his touch, her heart racing at the tenderness in his voice. "What changed?" "You." The word was simple, honest, devastating. "Watching you fight for Elena with everything you have. Seeing how you love her without reservation, even though it terrifies you. It reminded me of who I used to be before I got so afraid of feeling anything." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside their little cocoon of firelight and honesty, Maya felt something shifting. The walls Alexander had built around his heart were crumbling, and she could see glimpses of the man Caroline had loved, the man he could be again. "I'm terrified too," Maya whispered. "Of losing Elena. Of caring about you. Of letting myself hope that this," she gestured between them, "might be real." It's real, Alexander said, his forehead coming to rest against hers. Whatever this is, it's the most real thing I've felt in 8 years. They sat like that, breathing the same air, their hands intertwined, balanced on the precipice of something that could change everything. Maya could feel Alexander's internal struggle, the war between his instinct to protect himself and his desperate need for connection. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to let someone close without destroying them. Everyone I care about gets hurt. Everyone I care about gets sick, Maya countered. But we can't let fear make our choices for us. Caroline wouldn't want that. Elena wouldn't want that. What would they want? Maya smiled through her tears, thinking of her sister's constant encouragement to take chances, to live fully. They'd want us to be brave enough to try. Alexander studied her face in the firelight, and Maya saw the moment his decision crystallized. The moment he chose courage over safety, connection over isolation. Maya, he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. Yes. I think I'm falling in love with you. The confession hung between them like a bridge, terrifying, beautiful, impossible to ignore. Maya felt her heart stop, restart, then begin racing with a rhythm that matched the storm outside. Sometimes the people who understand our pain the best are the ones who've carried similar burdens. Have you ever found unexpected healing in someone else's brokenness? I think, Maya said, her voice shaking with hope and terror and desperate love, I'm falling in love with you too. The kiss that followed was inevitable, soft at first, tentative, then deeper as they both stopped fighting the connection that had been building since that first morning in his study. Alexander tasted like possibility and redemption, like coming home after years of wandering lost. When they finally broke apart, breathless and amazed, Maya saw something in Alexander's eyes that took her breath away. Peace. For the first time since she'd known him, Alexander Whitmore looked at peace. What happens now? She whispered. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I don't want to find out alone. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside their shelter of firelight and newfound honesty, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for Elena's recovery, but for her own healing. For the possibility that two broken people could help each other become whole again. The fire crackled between them, no longer a barrier but a witness to the moment everything changed. The moment they both chose love over fear, vulnerability over safety. The moment they found each other in the wreckage of their carefully constructed defenses. Maya woke to the sound of silence. For a moment, she couldn't place what was wrong. Then she realized, the wind had stopped. The constant howling that had been the soundtrack to their night had faded to nothing, leaving behind a quiet so complete it felt sacred. She was curled against Alexander's chest on the sofa, wrapped in his arms and the cashmere throw, and for the first time in months, she felt completely safe. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, his breathing deep and even with sleep, and Maya allowed herself a moment to simply exist in this perfect bubble of peace. Good morning. Alexander's voice rumbled through his chest, rough with sleep and something that might have been contentment. Is it morning? Maya tilted her head to look at him, struck by how different he looked in the soft light filtering through the windows. Younger, somehow. The sharp edges of his face were softened, his hair mussed from sleep, and when he smiled down at her, it was like watching the sun rise. Just barely. The storm passed around 4. His arms tightened around her slightly. How did you sleep? Better than I have in years, Maya admitted, then felt heat rise in her cheeks at how that sounded. I know what you mean. Alexander's thumb traced along her jawline, and Maya felt her breath catch at the tenderness in the gesture. I haven't slept through the night in 8 years. Until last night. They stayed like that for long moments, wrapped in each other and the quiet aftermath of the storm, neither wanting to break the spell that seemed to have settled over them. Outside, Maya could see that the world had been transformed, everything covered in pristine white, the damaged sunroom looking almost artistic under its blanket of snow. We should probably check the house, Maya said finally, though she made no move to get up. See what needs to be fixed. Probably, Alexander agreed, but his arms didn't loosen around her. In a minute. Maya laughed softly, delighted by this glimpse of a man who could put responsibility aside for a moment of simple pleasure. The practical billionaire who always has everything under control wants to stay in bed, well on the sofa, for just a minute. The practical billionaire is discovering that there are things more important than control. His voice was soft, wondering, as if he was surprising himself with the admission. Before Maya could respond, the sound of a car engine broke through their peaceful cocoon. Alexander sighed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head before reluctantly sitting up. "Graham," he explained, moving to the window. "Right on schedule, even after a blizzard." Sure enough, Graham's sedan was making its careful way up the cleared driveway, followed by what looked like a small convoy of service vehicles. "He's efficient," Maya observed, trying not to feel disappointed that their perfect morning was about to be invaded by the real world. "He's a miracle worker. Give him 2 hours, and you won't be able to tell there was ever a storm." Alexander paused, studying her face. "Maya, about last night, about what we said." Panic fluttered in Maya's chest. Was he going to take it back? Chalk it up to storm-induced vulnerability and return to his careful professional distance? "I meant every word," he said firmly, as if he could read her thoughts. "But I need you to know that this, it changes things. I can't go back to pretending you're just my employee." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if we're going to do this, we do it right. No hiding, no pretending it's something it's not." Alexander's jaw set with determination. "I'm saying I want to take you to dinner. Real dates, not employer and employee having work meetings. I want to introduce you to my friends, my family. I want—" He stopped, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I want everything, Maya. And that terrifies me, but not as much as the thought of losing this, losing you, because I was too cowardly to claim it." Maya felt her heart swell until it threatened to burst from her chest. This was Alexander stripped of all his careful defenses, offering her everything he had with a vulnerability that took her breath away. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes. Yes to dinner. Yes to meeting your friends. Yes to everything." She reached up to cup his face in her hands, marveling at how he leaned into her touch like a man starving for affection. "Alexander, I've been waiting my whole life for someone to look at me the way you're looking at me right now." The kiss that followed was interrupted by Graham's discreet knock on the front door, but the smile that spread across Alexander's face was worth the interruption. "Mr. Whitmore?" Graham's voice carried through the door. "I have the restoration crew here. Should we—" "Give us 10 minutes, Graham," Alexander called back, not taking his eyes off Maya. "Then we'll get out of your way." "Of course, sir." Maya laughed at the carefully neutral tone that suggested Graham knew exactly what he'd be giving them 10 minutes for. "Does he know about us?" "Graham knows everything that happens in this house," Alexander said, pulling her to her feet. "He probably knew we were going to fall in love before we did." The casual way he said it, fall in love, like it was a simple fact rather than an earth-shattering revelation, made Maya's knees weak. "Come on," Alexander said, taking her hand. "Let me make you breakfast before the chaos starts." The kitchen was a revelation in the morning light. Maya had worked in it for a week, but always with the efficient purpose of someone doing a job. Now, watching Alexander move around the space with easy familiarity, she saw it as what it could be, the heart of a home rather than just a workplace. "You cook?" she asked, settling onto a stool at the large island to watch him work. "Caroline taught me," he said, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator with practiced ease. "She said I'd starve if I didn't learn to make something besides reservations." The mention of his sister was natural, easy, a fond memory rather than a source of pain. Maya recognized the shift for the miracle it was. "What are you making?" "Caroline's French toast. Fair warning, it's ridiculously decadent and probably has enough calories to power a small city." Maya watched him whisk eggs and cream with focused concentration, marveling at the transformation. This wasn't the cold, controlled businessman who'd interviewed her a week ago. This was a man who hummed quietly while he cooked, who stopped to steal kisses when he passed her chair, who looked genuinely happy for the first time since she'd met him. "Tell me something about yourself that I don't know," she said as he dipped thick slices of brioche into the custard mixture. "Like what?" "Anything. Your favorite color, your biggest fear, what you wanted to be when you grew up." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering. "Blue," he said finally. "Ocean blue, like the Mediterranean. My biggest fear used to be failure, professional failure, personal failure, any kind of failure. Now—" He glanced at her, his expression vulnerable. "Now it's losing you." Maya's breath caught. "Alexander. And when I was 6, I wanted to be a pirate. His grin was boyish, transforming his whole face. Caroline and I used to play pirates in the garden. She was always the captain because she said girls were better at giving orders. The image of a 6-year-old Alexander taking orders from his little sister was so charming that Maya felt her heart melt completely. "What about you?" he asked, transferring the golden toast to plates with a flourish that would have made a professional chef proud. Deepest secrets of Maya Chun. Green, Maya said, accepting the plate he offered with something close to reverence. Forest green, like the trees in the park where Elena and I used to have picnic lunches when we were kids. My biggest fear is Elena dying. And I wanted to be a veterinarian until I realized that sick animals made me cry too much. "You have a savior complex," Alexander observed, settling beside her with his own plate. "Look who's talking, Mr. I single-handedly run a business empire to prove I am worthy." Touché. Alexander took a bite of his French toast and made a sound of appreciation. "Still got it." Maya tasted her own serving and nearly moaned with pleasure. "Oh my God, this is incredible." Caroline had good taste. She did. In food, in men, David was perfect for her, in everything except brothers. She really should have traded up. I think she chose exactly the brother she wanted. Maya reached over to touch his hand. "And I think she'd be proud of who you're becoming." The smile that spread across Alexander's face was radiant, transforming him completely. Maya realized she was seeing him as he was meant to be, open, warm, capable of joy that wasn't shadowed by guilt or fear. They ate in comfortable silence, stealing glances at each other like teenagers with their first crushes. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the restoration crew getting to work, but inside their kitchen bubble, time seemed suspended. "I should call Elena," Maya said eventually, though she was reluctant to break the spell. "Let her know the treatment money came through. Check how she's feeling about starting Monday." "Use my study," Alexander offered. "I'll deal with Graham and the crews." But as Maya started to rise, his hand caught hers. "Maya? Whatever Elena needs, treatments, specialists, anything, it's handled. I meant what I said about the money being in advance, but even if you decided to quit tomorrow, Elena's care is covered. I want you to know that." The casual way he offered to pay for her sister's life, easily, without hesitation or expectation, left Maya speechless. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you love her. And because he stopped, as if the words were too big, too dangerous to say in the bright light of morning. "Because you what?" Alexander stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. "Because I love you," he said simply. "And taking care of the people you love is what you do when you love someone. When someone you're falling for offers to solve your biggest problem without expecting anything in return, how do you know if it's genuine love or something else? What does unconditional support actually look like?" Maya felt tears prick her eyes, not the desperate tears of the past months, but tears of overwhelming gratitude and relief. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I love you so much it scares me." "Good," Alexander murmured into her hair. "Being scared means it matters. And this, it matters more than anything." They held each other in the morning light of his kitchen while the sounds of repair and restoration echoed around them, two people who'd found healing in each other's brokenness, hope in each other's courage. For the first time in years, Maya allowed herself to believe that everything might actually be okay. That Elena would recover, that she and Alexander could build something real and lasting, that love really could conquer the fears that had controlled them both for so long. The thought was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely perfect. They were going to be happy. Despite everything they'd lost, everything they'd survived, they were going to choose joy over fear, love over safety. They were going to choose each other. The restoration crew worked around them as they lingered over breakfast, stealing kisses and making plans and marveling at how different the world looked when you had someone to share it with. By noon, the house was back to its pristine state, but Maya noticed Alexander didn't retreat to his study as he usually did. Instead, he stayed close to her, finding excuses to touch her hand or brush a kiss across her forehead, as if he needed constant confirmation that she was real, that this was real. Maya understood the feeling completely. After months of crisis and fear, happiness felt almost too fragile to trust. But as the day wore on and Alexander continued to look at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, Maya began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something strong enough to weather any storm. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in the marble foyer of the Whitmore estate, staring at her reflection in the mirror that had once intimidated her so completely. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable from the desperate job seeker who'd first walked through these doors. Her skin glowed with happiness, her eyes sparkled with life, and she moved through the house with the confidence of someone who belonged. Because she did belong. Alexander made sure she knew it every day, in the way he sought her out for morning coffee, in the quiet conversations that stretched long into the night, in the gentle touches and stolen kisses that had become as natural as breathing. Elena's treatment was going better than anyone had dared hope. The experimental therapy was working, her numbers were improving daily, and for the first time in 2 years, the doctors were using words like promising and encouraged instead of palliative and manage expectations. Maya had never been happier. Which should have been her first warning that disaster was lurking just around the corner. She was arranging flowers in Alexander's study, a Friday afternoon ritual they developed, when Graham appeared in the doorway with an expression that made her blood run cold. "Ms. Chen? There are some people here to see you." People. They claimed to be from the Herald. Graham's voice carried careful disdain. Reporters. Maya felt the bottom drop out of her world. What do they want? They wouldn't say. But they asked specifically for you by name, and they're being persistent. Maya's hands shook as she set down the vase of white roses. The Herald was Boston's most aggressive tabloid, known for scandalous exposés and invasive journalism. They didn't come calling unless they smelled a story that would sell papers. "Where's Alexander?" "Conference call with Tokyo." "I can interrupt." "No," Maya said quickly. "Don't. I'll handle this." But as she made her way to the front door, Maya's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. What could they possibly want with her? She was nobody, a housekeeper, a woman so unremarkable that until a month ago, she'd been invisible to everyone including herself. The 2 reporters waiting on the front steps looked exactly like Central Casting would have ordered for aggressive paparazzi. The woman was sharp-featured with calculating eyes, while her photographer companion had the predatory stillness of someone always ready to capture the perfect shot. "Maya Chun?" the woman asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Janet Morrison from the Boston Herald. This is my photographer, Rick. We'd like to ask you a few questions." "About what?" "About your relationship with Alexander Whitmore." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Somehow they knew. Despite their discretion, their careful privacy, someone had discovered their secret. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean," Maya said, proud that her voice remained steady. "Mr. Whitmore is my employer." Janet's smile sharpened. "Come now, Ms. Chun. We have sources that say it's much more than that. Sources that describe intimate dinners, overnight stays, behavior that goes well beyond the typical employer-employee relationship." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "Your sources are mistaken." "Are they?" "Because we also have information about the rather substantial payment Mr. Whitmore made to cover your sister's medical expenses. $15,000, wired directly from his personal account. That seems quite generous for someone who's just an employee." The reporter's words felt like knives sliding between her ribs. How could they possibly know about Elena? About the money? The payment had been handled privately, discreetly, or so Maya had thought. "Mr. Whitmore is a charitable man," Maya managed. "Charitable enough to set up his housekeepers as live-in mistresses?" Janet pulled out her phone, swiping to a photo that made Maya's knees nearly buckle. It was her and Alexander, taken through the kitchen windows 3 nights ago. They were kissing by the stove while dinner cooked, wrapped in each other's arms, looking like the picture of domestic bliss. The intimacy, the obvious love between them, was captured in devastating detail. "Where did you get that?" Maya whispered. "We protect our sources, Ms. Chun. But I think you know how this looks. Alexander Whitmore, grieving billionaire recluse, takes advantage of desperate employee who needs money for sick sister. It's quite the story." It's not what happened." "Isn't it? You needed money desperately. He provided it. In return, you provide services beyond housekeeping." Janet's voice dripped with false sympathy. "I'm sure you care for him, dear. But the optics are unfortunate." Maya felt sick, dizzy with the implications of what Janet was suggesting. "You're twisting everything. It's not like that." "Then tell me what it is like." Give me your side of the story. Otherwise, I publish what I have, and the public draws their own conclusions. Behind Maya, she heard the unmistakable sound of Alexander's study door opening. Her heart clenched with dread as his footsteps approached the foyer. Maya? Is everything? Alexander's voice cut off as he took in the scene. Maya pale and shaking, the reporters with their predatory smiles, the obvious tension crackling in the air. Mr. Whitmore. Janet's smile became brilliant, victorious. Perfect timing. Janet Morrison, Boston Herald. I was just speaking with Ms. Chen about your relationship. Alexander's face went completely blank. Not angry, not defensive, just empty in a way that was somehow more terrifying than any explosion would have been. I'm not sure what you mean, he said, his voice arctic. Come now, Mr. Whitmore. We have photos, financial records, witness statements. You're clearly involved with your employee in a way that goes well beyond professional boundaries. Alexander's eyes flicked to Maya, and she saw something die in them, saw him retreat behind walls she'd thought they'd torn down forever. Ms. Chun is a valued employee, he said carefully. Nothing more. The words hit Maya like a slap. She understood the strategy: deny everything, present a united front, but hearing him reduce their relationship to nothing more in that cold, dismissive voice shattered something inside her chest. So you're denying any romantic involvement? Janet pressed. I'm denying that my private life is any of your business. But you're not denying the relationship itself. Alexander's jaw clenched, and Maya could see him calculating, weighing options, deciding how to minimize damage to his reputation and his business. Maya, he said, not looking at her, perhaps you should go upstairs while I handle this. The dismissal was gentle but unmistakable. He was protecting her the only way he knew how, by making her invisible again. And Maya knew, with the devastating clarity that comes with heartbreak, that he was choosing his reputation over her. Again. Just like he'd chosen work over Caroline. Actually, Maya said, her voice surprisingly steady, I think I should speak for myself. Alexander's head whipped toward her, eyes wide with something that looked like panic. Maya, don't. But Maya had already made her decision. If she was going to be destroyed by this story anyway, she wouldn't let Alexander sacrifice himself to protect her. Yes, she said, looking directly into Janet's predatory eyes. We're involved. Romantically. I love him, and I believe he loves me. But you're right about one thing, the optics are terrible. Maya, stop, Alexander said, his voice sharp with desperation. She turned to look at him, memorizing his face one last time before everything fell apart. It's okay, Alexander. You don't have to pretend anymore. I'm not pretending. Aren't you? Maya's voice cracked slightly. Because the moment someone threatened to expose us, you went right back to calling me just an employee. Just like you always said you would. The pain in Alexander's eyes was devastating, but Maya forced herself to look away. She couldn't let his anguish weaken her resolve. The story you want to write is simple, she told Janet. Desperate woman seduces wealthy employer to pay for sister's medical bills. It's ugly and reductive, but it's the story that will sell papers. So write it. Maya, what are you doing? Alexander's voice was raw, broken. I'm setting you free, Maya said simply. You never wanted this complication anyway. Now you don't have to choose between me and your reputation. The choice is made. She turned to go upstairs, to pack the few belongings she'd accumulated during her month of happiness, but Alexander's hand caught her arm. Don't do this, he whispered, and the desperation in his voice nearly undid her resolve. Please. We can figure this out together. Maya looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Can we? Because when the moment came to choose between protecting me and protecting yourself, you chose yourself. Just like you always said you would. That's not, I was trying to protect both of us. By denying I exist? Maya's laugh was bitter. By calling me nothing more than an employee? Alexander's face crumpled. Maya, please. I love you. You know I love you. I know you love me when it's convenient, Maya said softly. When we're alone in your beautiful house, playing pretend that the real world doesn't exist. But the moment that world intrudes, I become invisible again. She gently extracted her arm from his grip. I won't be your dirty little secret, Alexander. I won't be the thing you're ashamed of. I'm not ashamed. Then why didn't you just tell them the truth? That we fell in love, that it's real, that you'd rather face scandal than lose me. Maya's voice broke on the last words. Why was your first instinct to deny everything? Alexander opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. And in that moment of hesitation, Maya found her answer. Because despite everything, despite their confessions of love, their plans for the future, their shared healing, a part of him was still the man who put business calls before his sister's needs. A part of him would always choose safety over love when the stakes got high enough. Have you ever watched someone choose their reputation over your relationship? How do you know when someone truly sees you as worth fighting for, and when they see you as something to be protected from the world? I'll be gone within the hour, Maya said, proud that her voice didn't shake. You can tell the reporters whatever story serves you best. That I was delusional, that I misunderstood the situation, that you fired me for inappropriate behavior. Whatever protects your image. Maya. Goodbye, Alexander. Maya walked upstairs with her head held high, leaving behind the man who'd taught her to love again and the reporters who would destroy that love for the sake of a salacious headline. In her suite, she packed mechanically, each item a small goodbye to the life she'd briefly been allowed to imagine. The designer clothes Alexander had bought her. The books they'd read together by the fire. The small framed photo of them that she'd foolishly allowed herself to display on her nightstand. Below, she could hear Alexander's voice, cold professional, handling the crisis with the efficiency she'd once admired and now recognized as the very thing that would always come between them. When he loved her, he was everything she'd ever dreamed of. But when the world threatened to judge that love, he became the man who would always choose preservation over passion, safety over truth. Maya had lived in the shadows too long to accept being hidden again. She deserved someone who would claim her proudly, publicly, without reservation. She deserved someone who would fight for her instead of protecting himself from her. As she zipped her suitcase closed, Maya tried to memorize the sound of Alexander's voice drifting up from below, storing it away with all her other beautiful broken memories. She'd learned to love again in this house. Now she had to learn to leave that love behind. Because sometimes loving someone meant walking away when they weren't brave enough to choose you over their fears. Even when it destroyed you both. Maya stood in the cramped hospital corridor, watching Elena sleep through the small window in the treatment room door. Her sister looked fragile against the white sheets, but there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there in months, and the monitors showed numbers that made Maya's heart soar with cautious hope. It had been 5 days since she'd walked out of the Whitmore estate. 5 days since she'd seen Alexander's face crumble as she'd chosen dignity over love. 5 days of sleeping on her friend Jess's couch and pretending her heart wasn't shattered beyond repair. The Herald story had run as predicted, a sensationalized piece painting her as a gold-digging opportunist who'd seduced Boston's most eligible bachelor for financial gain. The headline alone made her sick: Billionaires' household secret, money, medicine, and mistresses. Maya had stopped reading after the first paragraph, but Jess had gleefully reported that the internet was having a field day with the story. Social media was split between those calling Maya a calculating predator and those defending her as a desperate sister doing whatever it took to save her family. Neither version was the truth, but Maya had stopped caring about public opinion. What gutted her was the silence from Alexander. No calls. No texts. No attempts to explain or apologize or fight for what they'd had. Just silence that grew heavier with each passing day, confirming what she'd suspected in that horrible moment in his foyer, that when forced to choose between love and reputation, Alexander would always choose safety. She's doing well, Dr. Patterson said, approaching with Elena's latest test results. Better than well, actually. The treatment is working faster than we'd hoped. Maya nodded, trying to summon enthusiasm for the miracle they'd all prayed for. That's wonderful. Maya. Dr. Patterson's voice was gentle. Elena is going to be fine. You can be happy about that. I am happy, Maya lied. I'm thrilled. But. Maya turned away from the window, unable to voice what was eating her alive, that she'd saved Elena's life at the cost of her own happiness, and she wasn't sure the trade had been worth it. Nothing. I'm just tired. Dr. Patterson studied her with the keen eyes of someone who'd spent years watching families navigate crisis. The man who paid for her treatment. You love him. It wasn't a question, but Maya answered anyway. It doesn't matter. Doesn't it? Before Maya could respond, Elena's voice drifted through the intercom from her room. Maya? I can see you lurking out there. Come talk to me. Maya forced a smile and entered her sister's room, grateful to escape Dr. Patterson's too perceptive gaze. How are you feeling? Maya asked, settling into the chair beside Elena's bed. Like I might actually live to see 30, Elena said, her own smile radiant despite her exhaustion. Which means I get to spend the next 60 years making sure you don't waste your life taking care of me. Elena. I saw the story, Maya. Elena's voice was quiet but firm. Jess showed me on her phone when you weren't here. Some friend you have, she thought I should know what you sacrificed for me. Maya's heart clenched. I didn't sacrifice anything. It wasn't real anyway. I was just. Stop. Elena's hand found Maya's, surprisingly strong for someone who'd been fighting for her life. Stop lying to me. Stop lying to yourself. You love him. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, and suddenly she was crying great, heaving sobs that she'd been holding back for 5 days. I did love him, Maya whispered through her tears. I loved him so much, Elena. And for a few weeks, I thought he loved me too. But when it mattered, when people were watching, I wasn't worth fighting for. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying her sister's face with the wisdom of someone who'd learned not to waste time on things that didn't matter. Or, she said finally, he was scared. Terrified. And he made the same kind of mistake you make when you're afraid of losing everything that matters. What do you mean? You didn't fight for him either, Maya. The observation hit like a slap. I walked away to protect him. You walked away to protect yourself. From being hurt worse, from being publicly humiliated, from having to see if he was brave enough to choose you when it got difficult. Elena's voice was gentle but relentless. You made a choice based on fear, just like he did. Maya opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Was Elena right? Had she been so afraid of Alexander's potential rejection that she'd rejected him first? He called me nothing more than an employee, Maya whispered. In front of reporters who were trying to destroy both of you. Maya, panic makes people stupid. It makes them say things they don't mean, make choices they regret forever. Elena squeezed her hand. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Maya could answer, a commotion in the corridor outside caught their attention. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, and what sounded like someone arguing with the nursing staff. I don't care about visiting hours, a familiar voice said, and Maya's heart stopped. I need to see Elena Chun. It's urgent. Maya's hand flew to her throat as Alexander's voice grew closer. Please. I've been trying to reach her sister for days. This can't wait. Elena's eyes went wide, then bright with something that looked like hope. Well, she said, settling back against her pillows with a satisfied smile. This should be interesting. The door to Elena's room opened, and Alexander filled the doorway. He looked terrible, hollow-eyed and rumpled, like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt was wrinkled, and there was stubble on his jaw that spoke of a man too distracted to maintain his usual grooming standards. But his eyes were alive with a desperation that made Maya's breath catch. Maya, he breathed, and the relief in his voice was palpable. I've been looking everywhere for you. How did you find me? Maya's voice came out as a whisper. Graham. He's been tracking Elena's treatment, making sure the payments went through. Alexander took a step into the room, then stopped as if he'd hit an invisible wall. Can we talk? Please. I don't think there's anything left to say. There's everything left to say. Alexander's voice cracked slightly. Maya, I've spent the last 5 days in hell, trying to figure out how I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. Elena cleared her throat pointedly. I'm Elena, by the way. The sister whose life you saved. Nice to finally meet you, Alexander. Alexander's attention shifted to Elena, and Maya saw his expression soften. Elena. How are you feeling? Better every day, thanks to you. Both of you. Elena's voice carried a weight that made both Maya and Alexander look at her sharply. But I'm worried about my sister. She's been crying for 5 days straight, which is really cramping my recovery vibe. Elena, Maya said, mortified. What? It's true. Elena turned to Alexander with the fearless directness of someone who'd faced death and found it less scary than wasted opportunities. So what's your plan, billionaire boy? Because if you're here to break her heart again, I'm calling security. I'm here to grovel, Alexander said simply. To apologize. To explain. And to ask Maya to give me another chance to prove I'm worth loving. The honesty in his voice made Maya's chest ache. Alexander. I was terrified, he said, his words rushing out like a dam had burst. When those reporters showed up, when I saw our private moments turned into gossip, when I realized loving you meant the world would judge us both, I panicked. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. I reverted to the man I was before you, the man who protected himself by keeping everyone at arm's length. And I hurt you in the most terrible way possible. You called me nothing, Maya whispered. I called you nothing because admitting you were everything terrified me more than facing those cameras. Alexander's voice broke. I called you nothing because if I told them the truth, that you're the woman who saved my life, who taught me how to love again, who made me remember what it feels like to be human, I would have broken down completely. Maya felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she couldn't look away from the raw honesty in his eyes. I should have told them I loved you. I should have said you were the most important thing in my life. I should have faced whatever consequences came and trusted that our love was strong enough to survive anything. Alexander's hands clenched at his sides. Instead, I did what I've always done. I chose safety over truth, preservation over love. Just like with Caroline, Maya said softly. Just like with Caroline. Alexander's nod was painful to watch. But Maya, you have to understand, losing you these past 5 days has been worse than any scandal, any public humiliation, any business disaster. I don't care if the whole world thinks I'm a fool for loving you. I'd rather be a public fool than a private coward. Elena was watching their exchange like a tennis match, her expression rapt. This is better than telenovelas, she murmured. Maya almost smiled despite herself. Almost. What are you saying, Alexander? I'm saying I love you. The words came out strong, clear, unwavering. I'm saying I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. I'm saying that if you'll give me another chance, I'll never hide our love again. Alexander pulled out his phone, and Maya's heart stopped as she realized what he was doing. I've drafted a statement, he said, showing her the screen. A public statement, to be released to every major news outlet, social media platform, and business journal in the country. Maya read the text with growing amazement. I am in love with Maya Chun. She is not my employee. She is my partner, my equal, my heart. The circumstances that brought us together don't diminish the authenticity of our feelings. Maya is the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever known, and I am honored by her love. Any criticism of our relationship is criticism of me, not her. I choose love over reputation, truth over appearance, and Maya over everything else. Alexander Whitmore. When someone you love is willing to risk their reputation, their business, their public image to claim you openly, how do you know it's real? What does it mean to be chosen over someone's fears? You can't publish that, Maya whispered, even as her heart soared. I can and I will if you'll let me. Alexander's voice was steady, determined. I want the world to know I love you. I want them to know that falling for you was the smartest thing I've ever done. Your business will survive. And if it doesn't, I'll build another one. Maya, I spent 8 years building walls to protect myself from feeling this much, and they nearly cost me the only woman I've ever truly loved. Alexander stepped closer, close enough that Maya could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. I won't make that mistake again. Elena made a small sound of approval. Now that's more like it. Maya stared at Alexander, seeing not the controlled businessman she'd first met, but a man transformed by love and determination. A man willing to risk everything for the chance to love her openly. The story will never go away completely, she said quietly. People will always whisper about how we met. Let them whisper. I know the truth, that I fell in love with an extraordinary woman who saved my life long before I saved her sister's. Alexander. Marry me. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Maya felt her world tilt on its axis. What? Marry me, Alexander repeated, dropping to one knee beside Elena's hospital bed with complete disregard for protocol or propriety. I don't have a ring yet, but I have everything else, a heart that belongs completely to you, a life I want to share, and the absolute certainty that I want to spend every day proving I'm worthy of your love." Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in delight. "Alexander," Maya breathed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just marriage, but a public declaration of love that would silence every whisper, every doubt, every cruel speculation about their relationship. "Say yes, Maya. Say you'll give me the chance to love you the way you deserve, openly, proudly, forever." Maya looked down at the man who taught her that love was worth fighting for, even when it was terrifying. The man who was willing to risk his reputation, his privacy, his carefully constructed life for the chance to build something real with her. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger, "Yes, Alexander. I'll marry you." Alexander surged to his feet, capturing her face in his hands and kissing her with 8 years of loneliness and 5 days of agony and a lifetime of love. When they finally broke apart, Elena was applauding weakly from her bed, tears streaming down her face. "About time," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was starting to think I was going to have to stage another medical crisis to get you two back together." Alexander laughed, a sound of pure joy that Maya had never heard from him before, and pulled her close. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "And I'm going to make sure the whole world knows it." As Maya melted into his embrace, she felt something she'd thought was lost forever settling back into her chest. Hope. Not just for Elena's recovery, but for their future together. For the possibility that love really could overcome fear, that courage could triumph over reputation, that two broken people could heal each other completely. Alexander had made his choice. He'd chosen her over safety, love over fear, truth over preservation. And Maya finally understood that sometimes the greatest act of love wasn't walking away, it was staying to fight for what mattered most. 6 months later, Maya stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of what was now truly their study, watching the spring rain create patterns on the glass. The room had been transformed since that first morning when she brought Alexander coffee with trembling hands, no longer a cold shrine to isolation, but a warm space filled with evidence of shared life. Elena's latest scan results were pinned to the bulletin board beside their wedding photos. Clean. Completely clean. The words still made Maya's eyes fill with tears of gratitude. Alexander's public statement had indeed caused a sensation, but not the kind anyone had expected. Instead of scandal, it had sparked a conversation about love, class, and the courage to choose authenticity over appearance. The business journals had called it a masterclass in crisis management through radical honesty. Social media had exploded with support for their love story. Most importantly, it had silenced the whispers. When Alexander Whitmore stood up and claimed Maya Chun as the love of his life, no one dared suggest she was anything less than deserving. "Mrs. Whitmore," Alexander's voice came from the doorway, rich with the contentment that had become his default state. "You're supposed to be getting ready for the party." Maya turned to find her husband of 3 months leaning against the doorframe, resplendent in his tuxedo but with his bow tie hanging loose around his neck, a concession to the man he'd become, someone who valued comfort over perfection. "I was just thinking," she said, moving into his arms with the easy grace of someone who knew she'd always be welcome there. Dangerous habit. Alexander's smile was warm against her temple. "What about? About how different everything is. How different we are." Tonight was the Whitmore Foundation's inaugural gala, a charity they'd established together to fund experimental medical treatments for families who couldn't afford them. Elena had insisted on being the keynote speaker, despite still being in recovery, because she wanted to tell the world what love in action looked like. "Good different?" Alexander asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The best different." Maya reached up to straighten his bow tie, marveling as she did every day that this man was hers. "Alexander. I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made him pull back to look at her face, his expression shifting to concern. "What is it? Are you all right? Is Elena?" "Elena's fine. Perfect, actually." Maya's smile was radiant. "But we might want to add a nursery to our renovation plans." The words took a moment to register. When they did, Alexander went completely still, his eyes widening with wonder and disbelief. "Maya," he breathed. "Are you?" 8 weeks along, she confirmed, laughing at the expression of pure joy that transformed his face. "Dr. Martinez confirmed it this afternoon. I wanted to wait until after the gala to tell you, but..." Alexander's kiss cut off her explanation, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around the study with the abandoned happiness of a man who'd learned to embrace joy without reservation. "We're having a baby," he said against her lips, as if testing the reality of the words. "We're having a baby," Maya confirmed, and felt her heart swell as Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "Caroline would have been over the moon," he said softly, and Maya felt her own tears start at the easy way he could now speak of his sister, with love and joy instead of guilt and pain. "She would have spoiled this baby rotten," Maya agreed. "Just like Elena's going to." "Elena doesn't know yet. I wanted you to be the first." Maya cupped his face in her hands, studying the man who'd become everything she'd never dared dream of. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Alexander laughed, the sound echoing through their transformed study. "Maya, I thought my capacity for happiness was broken. I thought I'd used it all up in the first 30 years of my life. Then you walked into this room and taught me that joy isn't finite, it's infinite, renewable, and it grows exponentially when you share it with someone who loves you. Is that your way of saying yes?" "That's my way of saying you've made me the luckiest man alive." Again. They held each other in the golden light of their study, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, Elena's medical victories, wedding photos, business plans for their foundation, and now the promise of new life growing between them. "We should go," Maya said eventually, though she made no move to leave his arms. "Everyone will be waiting." "Let them wait." Alexander's voice was muffled against her hair. "I want to remember this moment. Just us, our baby, our perfect life." "Our perfectly imperfect life," Maya corrected with a smile. "Remember, you still leave coffee rings on the antique furniture, and I still reorganize your files when I'm nervous. And Elena still gives me dating advice like we just started seeing each other," Alexander added, laughing. "Speaking of which, she's going to be insufferable when she finds out about the baby. She'll probably demand to be the godmother before we even tell her." "She already is the godmother. That was never in question." Looking back on your journey, can you see how the hardest challenges led to the greatest growth? How do you know when you found not just love, but the right love for who you're becoming? An hour later, Maya stood beside Alexander in the ballroom of Boston's most exclusive hotel, watching Elena command the room with her story of survival and love. Her sister looked radiant in the emerald green gown Alexander had insisted on buying her, healthy, vibrant, alive in every sense of the word. "The treatment that saved my life was possible because someone loved my sister enough to move mountains," Elena was saying, her voice carrying easily through the crowded room. "But more than that, it was possible because two broken people found healing in each other's courage." Maya felt Alexander's hand tighten around hers, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring, a simple platinum band engraved with Caroline's favorite quote, "Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend." Maya taught Alexander that vulnerability is strength, not weakness, Elena continued. And Alexander taught Maya that she was worth fighting for, worth choosing, worth loving without reservation. Their love story isn't a fairy tale, it's something better. It's real. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Maya barely heard it. She was too focused on the way Alexander was looking at her, like she was his miracle, his salvation, his greatest achievement. "She's not wrong," he murmured in her ear as Elena concluded her speech. "You did save me." "We saved each other," Maya corrected, then smiled as she placed his hand over her still flat stomach. "And now we get to save someone else." Alexander's breath caught, his eyes going soft with wonder as the reality of their growing family settled over him again. Later that evening, after the last guest had left and the last thank you had been said, Maya and Alexander stood in their garden under a canopy of stars. The estate looked different now, warmer, more welcoming, with lights in windows that had been dark for too long and the sound of laughter echoing through rooms that had forgotten joy. "Do you ever miss it?" Maya asked, nestled against Alexander's side as they swayed to music only they could hear. "The quiet? The solitude?" "Never," Alexander said without hesitation. "Maya, you turned this house into a home. You turned me into a man worthy of love. Why would I miss being half alive when I can have this? Even when Elena moves in with us next month to help with the baby preparations?" Alexander groaned dramatically. "Okay, I might miss the quiet a little bit when she starts giving the baby dating advice in the womb." Maya laughed, the sound carrying across their garden and through their home, adding to the symphony of life they'd created together. As they danced under the stars, Maya thought about the woman she'd been when she first walked through Alexander's front door. Desperate, invisible, convinced she wasn't worthy of love or happiness or dreams coming true. That woman couldn't have imagined this life. A husband who cherished her, a sister who was healthy and whole, a foundation that would help countless families, and a baby growing inside her who would never doubt that they were wanted, loved, and worth everything. "I love you," she whispered against Alexander's chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear. "I love you too," he replied, his voice rich with the contentment of a man who'd found his purpose. "Forever, Maya. In this life and whatever comes after." The wind rustled through the trees around them, and for just a moment, Maya could have sworn she heard laughter, light, joyful, and unmistakably feminine. Caroline's laughter, perhaps, or just the sound of happiness itself celebrating another victory over fear. Either way, Maya smiled and held her husband closer, knowing with absolute certainty that they'd chosen correctly. They'd chosen love over safety, truth over convenience, each other over everything else that had once seemed so important. And in return, love had chosen them, completely, unconditionally, eternally. The job nobody wanted had become the life everyone dreamed of. And Maya Chin Whitmore had never been happier to be wrong about fairy tales. After all, sometimes the best stories were the ones you never saw coming, the ones that started with desperation and ended with everything you'd never dared to hope for. Sometimes taking the job nobody wanted led to finding the love everyone needed. Sometimes happily ever after was just a choice away. Thank you so much for watching this video to the very end. I truly appreciate your time and support. May God bless you abundantly, guide your steps, and grant you peace and joy in everything you do. I'm deeply grateful for you, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the next video.
You made it to the very end. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. I'm sure you felt every twist and turn of the journey, and the best part is, it doesn't have to end here. Right now, another amazing story is waiting for you, even more captivating than this one. So go ahead, click the video on your screen and let's jump into the next adventure together.